person. We have a good crowd here this morning. And we're ready to begin our second part of the book of Zechariah, chapter 9. Zechariah, chapter 9. We have spent the best part of 2024 studying this period of time of Israel through its captivity and through and into the time of its return. We are at a point where we're going to be looking in the future at Haggai and Malachi after these two books. They're shorter books than Zechariah. And Haggai will, again, back us up a little bit to fairly close to the time where Zechariah began his message work with this remnant again. And then Malachi will be toward the end of Zechariah's life, and he will be the last, of course, he's the last prophet and book of the Old Testament we have. And I believe that his work was done much as the second part of Zechariah is, as we'll talk about, after the temple is completed. Okay, so and so we'll introduce that idea with Zechariah, and then we'll have to back up, kind of cover this same time period again with Haggai and Malachi. All right. We said that Zechariah had two parts to it when we looked at this book, and it's not labeled as such, but I think it breaks down this way, and maybe you can take this into your consideration. That the second part of this is a number of prophecies that we will see in chapters 9, 10, and then another in 11, and another in 12 and 13. We will, and 14. We'll see these, and they're a little different than what we see in the first part of the book, and its emphasis is a bit different, because it seems, at least to me, that from chapters 9 on, that the temple has been completed. Now, what has been the emphasis up through chapter 9 with Zechariah and the book we had before? Ezra, build the temple. Pretty simple message to them, right? We brought you back. God brought them back from captivity. They were volunteers that came back as the remnant to Jerusalem to rebuild the city, but primarily to rebuild the temple and get that done. God wanted it done. They volunteered to come back, to leave Babylonian way of life and return to the land of Jerusalem. And they came and they found a mess. They have fixed those things. They are working toward fixing those things. And the first 8 chapters, part of Zechariah's message to them is finish the temple. You did the foundation under Ezra and Nehemiah, but where's the temple? Why is it not done? You finish your houses. Why is the house of God not finished? And then coupled with that, though, there is, starting in the first 8 chapters, we see an introduction of the character of the Messiah that's being introduced by Zechariah, and what this coming king and priest combined will be like. And remember, we saw the coronation of Joshua, right? And then we saw the vision that he had, and the prophecy he had to encourage Zerubbabel, the governor, to finish the job, finish the temple. And so, and who was Joshua? He was high priest. Who was Zerubbabel? Governor. He was governor. But what was unique about Zerubbabel as well? What family? He's of the lineage of David, King David, isn't he? Never served as king, never was appointed king, but he was governor under the Persian Empire of this land. And so in those visions, we see a combining of those roles that Zechariah says, and he's prophesying that in the new kingdom, in this new Jerusalem, high priest and king are going to be the same. And then obviously the manifestation of that will be what we see through the church and God's spiritual kingdom with Jesus Christ as our both king and high priest. And we see that discussed at length in the book of Hebrews. Okay. And so all of that it gets us to where we are now. But let me ask you this. We talked about different ways to motivate people in the past. And one of Ezra's ways to motivate the people to rebuild the temple was what? God told you to. God told us to build this temple. So we need to get in here and get it done. Zechariah says you need to rebuild the temple. Why? Because the king's coming. The Messiah is coming. And he wants this place prepared for when he comes. Good motivation, right? Both are good motivations. But what do you do to motivate the people to remain loyal to God, to remain loyal to this vision and knowledge that the king is coming? How do you motivate them after the temple is finished? Which is where we are now in chapter 9. How do you motivate the people?
You have to maintain.
To remain faithful to God now that everything's technically, the checklist has been completed. I'm sorry, I got a couple of comments. Kirk?
The vision of Jesus is coming.
Yes, the vision of Jesus is coming. Brenda?
You have to maintain everything until he's there.
Right. Yeah, there is an element to you've built it, you can't let it turn into ruins again. That worship needs to be reinstated and carried forward until the Messiah comes. Very true. Well, Zechariah is going to lend his visions to, I think, both elements there. But he's going to point to that coming king and shepherd king, and he's going to start sharing a more glorious vision with these people. And he's going to deepen their knowledge concerning the Messiah, Jesus Christ. And when he's finished, they will have an appreciation of the love of God for them as a people in a way that I think previous generations, perhaps it wasn't shared with them, at least in the way it is with Zechariah's words. And so we start in chapter 9, and a couple of considerations for us to keep in mind now is that this urgent mission is done. But now what? Do you ever see that in congregations? There's an urgent mission that needs to be accomplished. I've seen it happen with buildings, physical church buildings. Everybody gets inspired and they're excited. They see the foundations of their new church building being done. I remember as a child one time being in a congregation where my daddy preached, and we went through this. And man, you'd see, we were meeting in the junior high across the road from where the building was being built. And once that building got started, I mean, every week we'd come to services and we see a little bit more done. You know, more framing. Wow, the parking lot got asphalted this week. Look at that. They got the doors on, the bricks going on the building. You know, all these things it was so exciting. And I remember being able to move across the road from the schoolhouse we were renting into our new place of worship. And it was so exciting. Everything smelled new. You know, the carpet, the pews, everything was brand new. And everybody worked so hard on that. And then what? Excitement kind of fades a little bit. You know, Sunday turns into Sunday, turns into another Sunday, and pretty soon you're like, why are we here? And you just kind of lose focus a bit. Businesses can be that same way. You know, the great big splash with a grand opening, and 6 months later, you know, you see a wane. Sometimes you even see a change of employees and things because they drift away or they quit, and others have to come in. But this is nothing unusual now. That's an issue. Zechariah is going to deal with it. So now what? Well, I think it is probably lends itself. The temple's been rebuilt, as we mentioned, and the short-term goals of getting that done is the first 8 chapters. And now what about these long-term goals? Do they have any? Do they know what they are? Right? Zerubbabel and Joshua may have them. Zechariah may understand them, but do the people understand? Seems like we just kind of got everything done. Now what? What's our long range goals? Well, they need them, and they need to understand the value of them. And so Zechariah is going to try to instill in these people in these final chapters that the greatest is yet to come, and that your hope for you and what should be driving you to get out of bed every day for the rest of your life in this remnant, in this finished Jerusalem, is the hope that is being given to your future generations. These people are not going to see the coming of the Messiah. And their children are. But the descendants of them and their children will. It's been said nobody plants an oak tree for their own shade. What do we mean by that?
For their own shade, is that what
Yeah.
you're saying? Because we think that oak trees take so long to grow that you're growing it for the next generation.
You do, you do. You ever see these giant homes around this area and you see these beautiful, elaborate, or massive oaks that have been planted and have been there for hundreds of years, obviously. And you're like, who had the vision to plant that tree there? They would never, the planter of that tree never would see the benefit of its shade. So why bother? Why not just plant a bunch of willow trees that'll grow 30 feet high in 10 years? And you'll enjoy shade from those trees. Why bother with the hardwood?
Because willows destroy foundations and.
Yeah. Willows, with the first wind or rain that comes along, you know, they don't last long, do they? They fracture. Bradford pears, hate them, right? Back in the 80s, every little town in America decided to plant these beautiful flowering white bloom trees in all their little downtown squares along the sidewalks. And they've all been pretty much torn up and ripped out by now because they're such a pest to try to maintain. They grow fast, and the first stiff wind that comes along, what? They break, they're soft wood, they don't last long, they're not even good for firewood. You can't even burn them well. And so that's part of this idea is these people need to have the hope of what's coming and to build for that. So when that coming Messiah comes, everything is in the fullness of times. It is prepared for his coming. Everything. And there's a lot here that they need to work on to have that statement to be true. So we're going to see three later prophecies right off the bat. We're going to see the first one being the coming shepherd king and Zion's subsequent blessings. We're going to see the offending of the shepherd king and the results of that offense. And then he's going to tell them about the final travail and the final triumph of Zion, which they have just helped rebuild. And of course, his emphasis is going to be on the spiritual Zion. Okay. So these are pretty profound. I want us to look now at chapter 9, the first 8 verses. We're going to see in chapter 9, we're going to see the coming shepherd king. This first big prophecy of Zechariah here, the coming shepherd king. And then we're going to, we'll break it down a little bit. Let's look at the first 8 verses. We're not going to read these 8, but I want to point out a couple of things in them. And this idea is this coming shepherd king is going to be victorious in his nature. He's going to be a victorious king. Now look at, and when you look at the first 8 verses, what jumps out at you here in these 8 verses? You see something that maybe jumps out at you? There's a whole bunch of places named, isn't there? Let's just go through them. The land of Hadrach, that's basically Syria, Damascus, Hamath, Tyre, Sidon, verse 5, Ashkelon, which is the land of the Philistines, Gaza, Ekron, mentioned, Ashdod, the pride of the Philistines, verse 6. Have we seen this list of nations before? Does this look a little familiar? Do you remember over in Ezekiel? He lists, and Jeremiah, they both talked about these nations, and they listed the enemies of Israel, and they named many of these exact people were named by those prophets as being enemies of the work of repairing and restoring Jerusalem. And so what is the point here about this coming shepherd king? He's going to what?
Forever possession.
Yeah, he's going to, his kingdom is going to defeat these nations. He's going to defeat them. Now, And I believe these are representative. These are the physical nations that represent the physical enemies of Israel, God's people. But I think they're representative now because these visions we're going to be looking at are messianic. Okay, so what do they represent? They represent the enemies of God, don't they? They represent all those who oppose the Lord and who refuse the Lord. All right. They represent those who refuse his word. And I put in parentheses, maybe that word has a capital W to it. And you think about John chapter 1. And who is the word of John chapter 1? Jesus Christ is. Right? And the word of the Lord came. And so when he's speaking about Jesus here, we're not talking about Jesus is going to come in physical battle and battle all these nations, because by the time Jesus came, some of these specific nations had already been destroyed by the Romans, right? A couple of centuries before Jesus came in. The Greeks and the Romans destroyed some of these nations, but they're representing people who refuse God. And so if people refuse God and they go up against Jesus, who wins?
Jesus.
Victory in Jesus, right? Think of Revelation. Is that not the primary message of the book of Revelation, specifically concerning the Roman Empire going up against Jesus Christ and his kingdom? Who wins? Satan and Caesar or God? God. If you don't understand anything else about Revelation, all those figures, that's it. That's what the whole book's about. And so Zechariah is sharing that message here in a different way, but that's really, I think, what he means by what he's done here in the first 8 verses, that victory for this remnant is going to be found in this Messiah. Does that make that Messiah somebody they want to see come?
Not the enemies.
No, I'm talking about the remnant.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Israel wants this Messiah. They shouldn't dread him. They should long for the day of his arrival, because he will be their victor. He will be their grand general. He will defeat the enemies of God. That is heroic in nature. Think back about why they were so excited when he entered on that donkey and they laid palm fronds at his feet. And what did the entire city roar when they saw Jesus enter on that donkey into this Jerusalem they just finished building? Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest, King of kings, Lord of lords. They were happy to see their Messiah, and the people were declaring him so. Where does all that come from? Where does that emotion and energy in those gospel accounts, where does that come from among the people? I'll tell you, it's right here. It's right here in Zechariah, because they understand these passages from these prophets are telling them good things are coming when the Lord comes. And this man, this performer of miracles, this man of God who cannot do anything of himself if he was not from God with the things he did and said, is he. He is he. So, these enemies are those who refuse that thought. And there were plenty of those too, weren't there? But this is not a physical Jerusalem under conversation here. This is all about this spiritual Jerusalem. Daniel chapter 2. Remember the stone that was going to knock down and destroy the statue of all the other nations? And it started out as a stone, and then it grew into a mountain and knocked over and destroyed the statue. And what was said about that mountain, that stone that became a mountain? It represented a kingdom that would come into the future that would never be destroyed. So what is the ultimate victorious kingdom? This one right here that Zechariah is describing. It's just like the one in Daniel chapter 2 that we studied a few months ago. All right. Look at verse 8. I think this is the key verse for this first section. But I will camp around. Now think about this in a messianic sense. But I will camp around my house because of an army, because of him who passes by and returns, and no oppressor will pass over them anymore. For now I have seen with my eyes. We have seen in the last couple of chapters, these creatures or visions of these angels that were sent out to the four corners of the world, right? The watchers of God, they're described as. They went north, south, east, and west, to and fro among the earth. And what was the message that they brought back to God? Everything's at peace, right? And then the remnants left to raise their hand. Oh, wait, things aren't so peaceful right here at Jerusalem. And the point was, God rules it all. Okay, not just one little piece in Jerusalem. The rest of the world's under other gods. God rules it all. And he says, things are at peace. You're being taken care of. You will be taken care of. You're going to be taken care of by me. That's why you should be consider yourself at peace. But he says this phrase, I have seen with my eyes. So why did I think that was important?
He's a witness.
Who?
Uh,
Zechariah?
Yeah.
Okay. Is that who the eye is there? Think a little bit. What is the difference between Jesus Christ and the prophets? You ever think about that? They both come from God. They're both spokesmen of God. Jesus is God, isn't he? Yeah, right? I mean, there's a closeness there. There's a distinction. Jesus or God, Jehovah, has seen the actions of man from the very beginning, and he has seen the actions of this nation. And he has seen it and allowed to use these prophets to communicate with him and he with them to bring to the people. But what's different when the Messiah comes? It's God that comes. And when Jesus is done with his ministry and he goes back to God the Father and sits at the right hand of God, what does he bring with him? Father, I have seen it all with my own eyes. I have experienced it all. I can safely say I can rule and judge these people for us because I know them, because I have been one of them. You see how unique that is? He has seen it with his own eyes. Do you ever have something told to you and you just say, I don't know about that. I'd have to see that with my own eyes before I believe that. What do you mean when you say that?
seeing is believing.
Seeing is believing, right? Right. We have a state in Missouri. What's their slogan? The show me state. What do we mean by that when we call them, oh, you're just a show me? I have to see it with my own eyes. If you're going to discipline or judge a people, before you enter into that harsh decision, wouldn't you like to be an eyewitness yourself of what you're condemning them of and the crime you're putting them away for? Sure you would, because that makes sure that you know that you're doing the right thing. Does God know he's doing the right thing? Yes, he does, because he has seen it with his own eyes. And what is included in that? That may give a little fear to Israel if they fully understood that. Physical Israel is not going to exist for eternity. They're going to reap the punishment of God for the evil that they have done. Those that refuse the word. And in AD 70, this great city they have rebuilt and this great temple they have rebuilt, in AD 70, what happens to that? Wiped out. You cannot visit the temple these people built today. The Romans destroyed it. Scraped Jerusalem clean. That nation of Israel does not exist today. Was destroyed by the Romans. But they got it, what they were deserved in righteous judgment, because God saw with his own eyes and experienced through Jesus Christ what he experienced with himself. I think that's a powerful verse to consider for us just to meditate on. So all this is about this victory, though, this victory of this coming king. Look on that verses 9 and 10 in this chapter. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout in triumph, O daughter of Israel. Behold, your king is coming. And I made a reference to this already. He is just and endowed with salvation and humble and mounted on a donkey, even on a colt, the foal of a donkey. Did we see a fulfillment of that prophecy in Jesus's lifetime?
Yes.
Clearly we did. And what were the surrounding shouts around the fulfillment of this? He's here, in essence. Hosanna is here. And they were treating him as a king. So he's going to be victorious. Why is he victorious, though? What's the why of the victory here? What's the reason for this great victory that Israel is going to be a part of and be a participant in? Because the king is coming. He is coming. That's motivation for faithfulness, isn't it? You know he's coming. And this idea of universal rule is all involved in that, because all these other nations, they're going to go away. This universal rule is what Daniel 2 talked about, that eternal kingdom that would destroy all these other kingdoms that Nebuchadnezzar dreamed about. But that kingdom would be established and would never cease to be. Of course, that being the church. Look at verse 10. The last part of verse 10. He will speak peace to the nations, and his dominion will be from sea to sea, and from the river to the ends of the earth. What does the victory of Jesus look like?
All encompassing.
All encompassing. Again, this idea of universal rule, right? And who's going to be receiving this peace that he brings? He doesn't bring warfare. He's going to bring what? Peace. And who's going to be the recipient of this peace? To the nations. Okay? Not just Israel. To all nations are going to have access to this through this idea of universal rule. So the victory that we achieve is through who? Jesus. It's through him. He will speak peace to the nations, and his dominion will be from sea to sea and from the river to the ends of the earth. So we see the victory of Jesus is clear. The why of the victory is clear because he's going to establish this universal rule. And now, how full is this victory going to be? Starting in verses 11 through the rest of the book. And there are 7 things in verse 11 through 17 that are mentioned. Okay, here we go. 7 things that the Lord is going to provide when he comes again in this grand victory. He's going to provide, verse 11, he's going to give you redemption. He says, I have set your prisoners free from the waterless pit. He's going to bring redemption. Verse 13, he's going to bring unification. For I will bend Judah as my bow, and I will fill the bow with Ephraim. Now, those are symbolic. Who does Judah represent? Think back in your history a bit. The southern kingdom. Who does Ephraim represent? The northern kingdom. And typically, when you see Ephraim referred to, it's the sins or the wickedness of the northern kingdom. Okay, they were the baddest of the bad. That tribe was not very good in the latter years. So you've got Judah and Israel is going to be brought together. For the Jew, that's very important to understand. But he goes on, he says, I will stir up the sons of Zion against your sons, O Greece. And I will make you like a warrior sword. Greece is going to be involved. Well, who does that represent? Us, the Gentiles. So both aspects of the Jew, northern and southern, and Gentiles as well are going to be part of this. It's unification in this new kingdom. Folks, that's different. Number 3 is in verse 14. He will appear over them. Then the Lord will appear over them. The idea is to lead them He will go forth like an arrow, going forth like lightning. The Lord God will blow the trumpet. Who's been the one blowing the trumpet up till now? The prophets. The messengers of God have been blowing the trumpet of the message of God. But in verse 14, when the Lord comes, the shepherd king comes, who's going to be the one blowing the trumpet? He is. He himself will blow his own horn and his own message. He is bringing God to earth, to man, and God's message. Kind of goes back to that phrase, I have seen it with my own eyes. I have brought my own message to my own people. He's not using prophets anymore here. He's going to bring it himself. Elsewhere, we've seen the prophets described as blowing the horn of the message, but now God himself will come and deliver this message. Look at verse 15. He's going to defend them. The Lord of hosts will defend them. Verse 16, the fifth one, the Lord will save them in that day as the flock of his people. For they are as, and here's the next one, the stones of a crown sparkling in his land, in his land. He's going to elevate them as diamonds. They're going to be precious to God. Verse 16. And then lastly, verse 17, the last part, for what comeliness and beauty will be theirs. The grain will make the young men flourish, and new wine the virgins. Ask rain from the Lord at the time of the spring rain. The Lord who makes the storm clouds, he will give them showers of rain, vegetation in the field to each man. He's going to prosper them, isn't he? He's going to bring them prosperity. Now, again, this is messianic. So when we look at prosperity, is this where we need to go to find the get rich quick by being righteous philosophy? It's so popular among television evangelists today. God wants you to be rich. Just pray for it. You'll get it. If you'll send me a little bit of it, you'll get it even quicker. Right? I mean, in essence, that's kind of what they do every Sunday morning on TV. Folks, this is not that prosperity. What is the prosperity being talked about here in the spiritual kingdom? What do you lay up for yourselves in heaven? Treasures. Lay your treasure up in heaven where moth and rust does not consume. Is the blessings of heaven worth everything on earth?
So,
More so. I could have everything that the world could give me. And folks, if I could trade that for heaven, I'm making a good deal. That's a good deal. And that's the point here. He's going to prosper them. Where would you rather be for eternity? With God and the angels and all the grandeur and glory that possibly can be described in man's words of what heaven is? Or just have everything Elon Musk has in this world, die and go to hell? To be with Satan and the demons for all eternity. I mean, which one would you rather have? Which kind of prosperity do you want? This prosperity is being referred to as the one that's everlasting, because this is an everlasting kingdom. This is an everlasting people within that kingdom with everlasting promises of God fulfilled by Jesus, who has seen it with his own eyes. All right. That's really chapter 9. Any comments or questions on that? We'll see if we can get the second half of this. This one kind of ties to chapter 10. Pete.
Well, you'd mentioned about the motivation, what would motivate them. I think one of the things that people say nowadays, or you hear a lot, well, when's the earth going to end? We're told that it's going to happen, and when it's not happening, it's supposed to be happening in our time. Well, if we go back here and read in the Old Testament, it's a motivation for us. But they had a motivation too, and that was Abraham. There were promises made to him. He didn't get to see them, but they could see that, okay, it takes time for these promises to come about.
And that makes me think of Hebrews chapter 10, right? Where it talks about Abraham there and so many other righteous people. And it says a phrase about them there. What? They could see what? They saw a country afar off.
Right.
They had the faithful vision, didn't they? They could see the reward, though they would not inherit it in this world. They were looking to a world that they would inherit. Right? And there's a whole list of people that responded in actions in this world a certain way because they saw what was being offered. Not everybody did, but they did. And those people are considered, Faith's Hall of Fame, right? That chapter. Good point though, but Abraham definitely says, he saw it. And that was his motivation. I think Zechariah is trying to give these people that same motivation. Pretty powerful. Other thoughts, comments?
No, this is a holy war, not a earthly war, like
Uh-huh.
some of the religious sects in this world believe.
Yep.
Very clear. It's not a battle of men, it's a battle of spirit.
Yeah, and I love how some of these messianic visions or prophecies, they weave in spiritual aspects that make us understand that and remember that we talk about these angelic beings that went to and fro through the world. Hey, that brings that spiritual aspect of this to mind. Yeah, good. All right, let's look at chapter 10. Chapter 10 continues with this idea of the coming shepherd king, and then Thine subsequent blessings from his coming. So what the Lord will find and what he will do is what we see in chapter 10. Okay, and at the time of the arrival, as you just kind of look through the chapter, when Jesus comes, verses 2 and 3, Zechariah says, we're going to be leaderless. Therefore, the people will wander like sheep. They are afflicted because there is no shepherd. Do these people need Jesus when he comes? Does Israel need this shepherd king? Yes, they have no shepherd. What happens to sheep with no shepherds? They get eaten by wolves, don't they? They scatter, they wander, they don't prosper, they get sick and afflicted, and nobody heals them. So at the time of Jesus' arrival, they're going to be leaderless. And verses 2 and 3 tells us that. And then it says in verses 4 and 5, this Messiah will be one of you. My anger, and look at verse 4. From them will come the cornerstone. From them the tent peg. From them the bow of battle. From them every ruler, all of them together. The Messiah is going to be one of you. That is motivation to stay faithful too, isn't it? If this shepherd king's got to come from us, we need to make sure that we're right with God so that can come about. Look down at verse 6. He's going to bring them back through their descendant. Look how he talks about Jesus Christ here. Then I will strengthen the house of Judah. Jesus was from the tribe of Judah. And I shall save the house of Joseph. I shall bring them back because I have compassion on them, and they will be as though I had not rejected them. For I am the Lord their God, and I will answer them. I will have compassion on them, and they will be as though I had not rejected them. What's that a reference to? So it sounds like God's rejected Israel. He has, hasn't he? He punished them. He divorced him. He divorced them from himself, didn't he? That's what the captivity was all about. They were so unfaithful for so long, he finally said what? Enough is enough, you wicked, whoring people. I'm putting you into bondage. And he divorced himself from them. And in Ezekiel, it's described as leaving the temple and his dwelling place among them. God left the temple. He said, keep your idols if that's what you want. Keep your worship. I don't want it. You worship Baal in the morning, you come in here and try to worship sacrifices to me in the afternoon. Be gone. I'm out of here. And Ezekiel describes the Spirit of God leaving. He left them. He put them away. But he says in this new kingdom, It will be as though that never happened. That's compassion. God's going to, in this new kingdom, put it all together with the consist of people who would never have wanted that to have happened. Faithful people, people that love God as much as God loves us. I want to be part of that. And that's what's talked about here. He's going to bring them back through their descendant Christ. And look down at verse 8. He's going to purchase them with a price. He says, I will whistle for them to gather them together, for I have redeemed them. What does that mean? This shepherd king's going to do what? Forgive them. And he's going to redeem them. He's going to exchange something for these people. If I'm redeeming something, I'm buying something. I'm exchanging something for something else. Who is this coming shepherd going to make that exchange with?
It's life.
His life. But who's he got to exchange it with? Who's on the other end? Not God. Satan. He's the one that God and Jesus steps in and say, oh, wait a minute, you can't have all these people. These are righteous. You have to, I'm redeeming them out of your grasp, Satan, with my blood, the perfect sacrifice. Satan has no argument. He thinks he's in control of all man. And Jesus comes in and says, nay, nay. I am establishing an eternal kingdom that you have no part in. And my people will have no part with you. I'm redeeming them for my own. He's the creator. Satan cannot argue. So he loses his grip upon those people because Jesus purchased us with a price. He redeemed us. Verse 9, Christians will be and will go everywhere. This idea of this new spiritual kingdom is not going to have any boundaries, is it? Is that a good thing? Yes. I don't want to hear that the spiritual kingdom is only in Europe or Asia or the Middle East. I will scatter them among the peoples. They will remember me where? In far countries, and with their children will live and come back. I will bring them back from the land of Egypt and gather them from Assyria. I will bring them into the land of Gilead and Lebanon until there's no room to be found for them. This kingdom is going to be so immense, it's going to cover the earth, and there will be no limit to where it can be found. What is the great commandment that we are given? The Great Commission, right before Jesus' ascension back to the right hand of God. Go where? Into the next county? And then you're done? Go where?
Into all the world.
Go into all the world. Why? Because that's the territory of the kingdom. The whole world is to be the territory of this new kingdom, never to be destroyed. Daniel chapter 2. Back to that again. Lastly, in verse 12, these people are going to bear and have a new name. Look at verse 12. And I shall strengthen them in the Lord, and in his name they will walk, declares the Lord. They will bear the name of the coming shepherd king. Do we do that? Do you bear the name of Jesus Christ? When we use that term bear, I think you need to think of a banner, okay, not a bird. Okay, it's bearing the name of Jesus Christ here is not meant to make you think, I've got to carry this heavy pack and it weighs 80 pounds and it's the name of that pack is Jesus. That's not the point. The point is in this army and this nation analogy that you're the banner carrier, right? And what do banner carriers do?
Be seen,
What were the purposes of banners?
to be seen.
To be seen? What else? There's military reasons for banners, right? To identify who you are, to show where your leaders are. And they would use certain banners to send certain messages so that it could be seen, and they would know what to do from distances so that there was coordination and effort among the armies of that were following those banners. Communication could occur that way. The whole idea of the semaphores and all those things back in military history is all part of this. And I think that's part of what he says, that he will strengthen us, and in his name they will walk. We sing a lot of songs about that, don't we? Footsteps of Jesus, wherever they may go. There's just so many of them. But Zechariah says that in this new Jerusalem, we're going to walk in the name of the new shepherd king. That sounds pretty good to me. And so lastly, in verse 12b here, this is the phrase we've just talked about. In his name, they will walk, declares the Lord. If you want to go to heaven, you got to go with Jesus. Can't get there any other way. You got to go with him. Do you see why? You see why you have to go with Jesus in Zechariah chapter 9 and chapter 10? Because he's the one that's done all these things. He's the one that's nothing else. He's redeemed us from Satan. He's the one that says, I will protect you. He's the one that's going to bless us with blessings. He's the one that's going to put all this in place. That's motivation. If I'm one of these people, I'm ready to get out of bed the next morning and hear what else Zechariah's got to say in chapter 11. But you'll have to wait till next week. All right, we're out of time. Next week, we will look at chapter 11 and move into the next second prophecy of his latter prophecies. 9 and 10 kind of go together, so we lump those together as one. We'll do chapter 11 next week.
You in the military, Chris?